Hello and welcome to earlymusicsources.com. My name is Elam Rotem, and today we will examine the contrapuntal technique that Josquin used when composing his 5 and 6 voice chansons. In a past episode, we looked at the famous chanson Mille Regrets, commonly attributed to Josquin. We explained that we are not actually sure who composed it. In this episode, however, we will look at chansons which are more reliably considered to be by Josquin. In them, he used a very interesting technique that sheds light on their compositional process, something that we are very interested in. Specifically, we will look at the beautiful chanson Parfons, Regretz and try to imagine how it might have been composed. Let's start. The sources of Josquin's secular repertoire are somewhat problematic. The lion's share of his 5 and 6 part chansons are available to us only thanks to a print by Tilman Susato from 1545, 24 years after Josquin's death. Despite the general lack of supporting sources from the time, scholars believe that Susato's attributions are for the most part reliable. The interesting thing about these pieces is that almost all of them share the same compositional structure. They are based on a 2-part canon that goes through the piece. That is, a melody in one part is imitated by another part at a certain time and pitch interval. This is then used as the foundation of the entire piece, and the rest of the voices are written around it. On top of this, a little opening section is included, often with materials taken from the beginning of the canon, as well as a little ending or coda. It should be noted that this canonic technique is not limited to the composition of chansons in Josquin's repertoire, and can be found in many other pieces for 5 or more voices by other composers in the first half of the 16th century. To show you how a whole chanson is composed with such a technique, we'll examine the 5-part chanson Parfons, Regretz. Naturally, I don't know the exact process and thoughts Josquin had in his mind when he composed it. What I present is merely a hypothetical process. Let's see. Every good vocal piece in the 16th century starts with a text. And like many chansons by Josquin and his circle, Parfons, Regretz deals with regrets and sadness, subjects which are a fertile ground for wonderfully sad music. Let's listen to the text, read in what we believe to be a historical pronunciation, and see the English translation.
Parfons, regrets et lamentables jouets, venez à moi quelque part que je sois, et vous hâtez sans point dissimuler, pour promptement mon cœur exécuter, afin qu'en deuil et larmes il se noie.
Note the rhyming scheme, A, B, B, and then again A for the concluding line. This will be reflected in the way Josquin structures his canon. To begin the canon, one needs to decide which voice starts and what is the pitch and time interval between the leader and follower. That is, how much higher or lower the follower should enter, and after how many rests. For Parfons, Regretz, Josquin decided to have the leader of the canon in the bass part, and have the pitch interval of the follower an octave above it, which places it in what was then considered an alto range. For a time interval, he chose 3 breaths, that is, that the follower will start after 3 breaths. With these basic parameters, he could start composing a melody for the canon.
Parfons, regrets.
When composing the rest of the phrase, Josquin took into account the resulting imitation. He continued in this way.
Et lamentable joyeux.
Notice that with a slight adjustment, it is possible to insert the opening notes 1 breath earlier. In this way, it is no longer a functional canon, but might still be useful at some point. Notice also that the second part of the sentence can fit on top of the first. Such modularity, in which materials can be used in different ways, is very typical in Josquin's writing and will be exploited in the free opening of the piece. Before going on with the canon, Josquin decorated the line with simple diminutions at the end of both phrases.
Parfons Regretz et lamentable joyeux.
The next line of the text has the same rhyme and structure, so Josquin used the exact same melody again. He could have waited for the follower to finish before starting the new line, but he chose to overlap it with the first one. Josquin loved overlapping. This is probably to make sure that the music never stops, but goes on instead and flows forward.
Venez à moi, quelque part que je sois.
The third line has another rhyme, so Josquin honored it with a new melody, which, as expected, also overlapped with the last note of the former section.
Et vous hâtez sans point dissimuler.
And also here, Josquin broke up some of the notes with simple diminutions, which add beauty and refinement to the melody.
Et vous hâtez sans point dissimuler.
The fourth line has the same rhyme and structure, so Josquin used the same melody.
Pour promptement mon cœur exécuter.
The last line of the text is the conclusion of this very sad poem, in which grief and tears drown the heart. It is treated specially, creating a sort of a climax. The line climbs up, stretching the range of the melody up to a tenth, having the word larme, tears, at its very top, and then descending again.
Afin qu'en deuil larmes il se noie.
The last musical line is a repetition of this melody, but a fifth lower. This, apart from navigating us back to the final of the mode, G, gives a sense of confirmation. Of course, it also overlaps with the former section, but in a rather surprising way, starting on a B flat after what sounded like a cadence to D.
Afin qu'en deuil larmes il se noie.
This is it. This is the canon upon which Josquin based his chanson. Notating it just on one staff, as canons were sometimes notated in that period, we can see the form very clearly. The text lines 1 and 2 with one melody, lines 3 and 4 with a second melody, and the climactic fifth line with a third melody that appears twice. While making a melody that conforms with the text so nicely is an art, making sure it works as a canon is a greater art. But making a 5 or 6 part piece out of it is a completely different level of brilliance. Let's try to find out how Josquin did it. In the 16th century, pieces for more than 4 voices included the standard 4 parts, soprano, alto, tenor, and bass, and any additional part would be called the 5th part, quinto, the 6th part, sesto, etc., and would be in the range of one of the existing parts. In Josquin, Parfons, Regretz, the fifth part is another voice in the alto range, and it is this fifth part which Josquin assigned as the follower of the canon melody. And so, we have our score where the bass and the fifth part are written out with our pre-made canon, and we just need to fill up the blanks. As we explained, Josquin usually began the pieces with an opening section before bringing in the canon. What he did here was to present the canonic material in the tenor and soprano, utilizing the fact that the first part of the sentence can enter after only two breaths, and that the second part can appear above the first. Thanks to the modularity of the material, he was able to make this opening sound like an intricate web of imitative entrances. It should be noted that the process that I present here of first finishing the entire canon and then adding the opening is not necessarily how Josquin did it. It could also be that he started by composing this opening and only then came up with the canon. In order to enrich the texture of this opening, Josquin filled up the alto part freely. Since it has no thematic material, it is almost certain that this was the last part he composed for this section, purely as a filler material accompanying the other voices. Let's listen to this beginning in a performance we made especially for this episode, with two singers singing the canon and three Renaissance string instruments playing the other parts. I chose this performance setting so that the canon may be easily heard. I don't know whether Josquin would have liked it or not. Now let's go on with the piece. We see how Josquin accompanied the canon once it entered. You can see that the three added voices are written in a rather free way that doesn't include any thematic material. For this reason, it is hard for me to guess in what order they were conceived. But anyway, the compositional process is not necessarily linear. You write something, you change something, you delete something, etc., until you are happy with it. I will, however, mention four interesting things about it. First, note the rhythmic imitation on "est lamentable" in the alto and then soprano. This is something that catches the ear every time it occurs. Second, note how the soprano part repeats the same melody twice. Is this something Josquin planned, or did he just jump on the opportunity once he discovered it? We can't really say. Third, note how the two explicit E-flats create a false relation between the unavoidable E-naturals that come before them. Josquin didn't have to use E-flats, but he intentionally chose to have this very painful transition between a minor harmony on A and then a minor harmony on C. I think that this is one of the things that give this piece its special color. The last thing I'd like to point out is the nice little diminution at the end of the soprano line. To me, this is a little detail that ties up this section, a little cherry on top of our canon-based polyphony. Let's listen to how our canon is accompanied from the point where it enters. The second line of text, as we said, is composed with the same canonic melody as the first. And so, the three accompanying voices repeat more or less what they did before. Let's listen to the second line of text and enjoy again the special harmonies that are created and the nice soprano line that floats over everything. The third line of text, again, I can't say exactly how Josquin ended up completing the missing voices the way he did, but this is a possibility. He recognized the opportunity of creating a cadence using the end of the canonic melody, that is, the fact that it can be used as a tenorizans. Once it has been recognized as a tenorizans, a melody ending with a cantizans may be added accordingly. And so he added one, once in the alto and once in the soprano. By the way, if you need to refresh your memory about how cadences work, check out our old video about it. He then added a third voice to these cadences. To the first cadence, he just added consonant filler material, nothing substantial. But with the second one, he exploited the fact that the cadence is high and added below it a line that ends with a basitsans. In this way, despite being based on one repeating melody, we have two different kinds of cadences one after the other, a tenor cadence and an authentic cadence. Once these cadences were set, there was very little to add, mainly in order to fill the big gap until the other voices entered. He just had to make sure that every voice had all the text. Let's listen to the performance of this third line of text. The additions surrounding the canon in the fourth line of text are almost the same. The only exception is the beginning of the tenor line. It is slightly simplified. For the first appearance of the last line of text, Josquin used a beloved old trick. He simply accompanied the canon and its imitation in parallel tenths or thirds. In each of the instances, for the sake of the always coveted variety, the parallel motion is slightly broken by changing small details. If before the canon melodies might have been hidden in the texture, such close accompaniment supports and accentuates it. To this, he adds the tenor voice. In the first part, purely as filler material, but in the second part, as part of a cadence. The two existing voices can be seen as a tenorizans and cantizans, and so he adds below them a line that ends with a basitsans. Notice that it is not possible to make a cadence before that with the bass melody, as a potential cantizans would create parallels against the canon imitation that are not acceptable contrapuntally. When listening, notice how the final cadence is evaded thanks to the last canon section entering in the bass on the B flat. Let's listen. For the second appearance of the last line of text, a fifth lower, Josquin followed the same procedure. Each voice gets an accompanying line in tenths or thirds, which is lightly adjusted for variety's sake. The addition of the tenor voice in this section is very interesting. Whereas in the first part, Josquin repeated the same harmless filler material he used in the former section, in the second part, he did something different. Instead of adding a voice below the existing voices with a basitsans, Josquin now made the tenor leap between the upper voices and descend in what resulted in parallel 6 chords and a tenor cadence, a progression often referred to as faux bourdon. Such a progression started to be considered old-fashioned by this time, and was often used when sad or otherwise unpleasant texts were treated. Again, the different and original realizations of the same basic material leads to strikingly different results. Before listening to the performance, note also the little cadential written out diminution in the cantizans, when in the parallel place before there had been only a long semi-brief. Let's listen to this beautiful part. Now that we made it to the end of the canon, all that is left is to make a little coda. This is done by prolonging the finalis, the last note of our melody, and adding some consonances around it. I believe that Josquin started composing this part with this semi-canon between the soprano and bass. And then he added the two inner voices to simply accompany and enhance the bass line. As you perhaps may see, this, like many other pieces from that period, including the famous Mille Regrets we looked at together, seems to end with a minor harmony. Around the middle of the 16th century, such a thing would have become practically impossible, as by that time all pieces had to end with a major harmony. But in the time of Josquin, some decades beforehand, it was definitely an option. Let's listen to the end of this beautiful chanson. If you are interested, you may browse other chansons by Josquin for 5 and 6 voices and find out whether he used this canon technique in them. If so, you could go through a procedure similar to the one we followed, trying to trace the elusive compositional process.
This was our show about how Josquin might have composed his chansons. We hope you enjoyed it. Many thanks to Jonatan, Baptiste, Uri and Filipa for recording Parfons Regretz with me. Of course, below you will find a link where you can listen to the entire piece uninterrupted. Don't forget to check the special page on our website with all the footnotes and other extra information. If you enjoy early music sources, feel free to support us on Patreon, comment, share and like. See you next time at earlymusicsources.com.